you might call it, you might think of the things of this era that start with the word re, because there's reforms, like societies that are trying to make themselves better and stronger, to reform. Wait, what's the society that attempted to reform? Ottoman Empire, Japan, and certainly in the industrialized West, there were a lot of reforms as well. Political reforms, educational reforms, like public schools, urban reforms, like building sewers and having police and having parks and stuff. Those are all examples of reforms. Revolutions, of course, the Industrial Revolution, and lots of revolutions. Resources, keep in mind how controlling resources, especially raw materials, is important to a lot of people in industrial economies in this time period. And Enlightenment! Reason. And since that was our very first topic way back in January, let's take a quick reminder of the Enlightenment, this intellectual movement that arose first in Europe, but then as your SAQ on the practice exam reminded you, did you notice there was an SAQ all about the Enlightenment? That was pretty cool, wasn't it? And about how the Enlightenment had repercussions beyond Europe, where it began. So that was kind of neat. Remember, the kind of the key ideals of the Enlightenment were freedom and equality. You can think of the French philosophe Voltaire and him believing in the brotherhood of man, the equality of all people. And perhaps most importantly, the use of reason to improve human life. That folks are less interested, if they're Enlightenment believers, in focusing on religion's ability to provide answers to the problems of life, and more interested in humans using reason and the scientific method to solve problems of human life, even like crime and warfare and inequality and poverty and tyranny. Enlightenment thinkers thought all those things would be solved if humans would just use their reason and follow these ideals. Natural rights, the idea that we, all of us, just because we're human, have rights that cannot be taken away from us. Constitutional government. Think about John Locke and the social contract. What did the social contract say? Like, we give the government what in return for what? Yeah, we give the government power to raise taxes and have a police and whatnot, because the government is then in return going to protect our natural rights. John Locke called that the social contract. And if you believe in all of these things, remember, there's an ism that describes what those beliefs are, and it's based on the word liberty. It is liberalism. And of course, the Enlightenment and liberal ideals were behind all of these key Atlantic political revolutions that we're going to take a look at here. The first one, of course, being the one in America. Do not try to write this down. But remember that the American colonies were, relatively wealthy places, and the British government was hoping to raise taxes to pay for a variety of wars that they've been fighting. And remember, too, that Britain already had, to a large extent, by 1750, a constitutional government with a parliament that was kind of elected, and with a Bill of Rights that protected your rights as a citizen of Britain. And really, one of the desires of the American Revolution and the colonists in America was to preserve those rights and make sure that they, too, continued to enjoy the kind of self-government and protection of rights that they had as British citizens that at that time the British government was attempting to kind of take away from them. So the USA was created, and constitutional government originally from Britain was strengthened in what's now the United States, and that the economics and the social structure we were producing continued the same way they were before. Not a lot of change outside of politics because of the American Revolution. And a key reminder of that is what? What's an institution that continued in the United States related to economics and social structure despite its claims about liberty and equality? What do we think? Slavery, yeah. So slavery continued in the United States for nearly a century after the American Revolution. Not a big change there. So radicalness of this revolution? Not much. I mean, it kind of was a revolution that kept things the way it had been before, when it was Britain, the ruler, that was trying to change things. But it did inspire another revolution back across the Atlantic in what was then Europe's wealthiest, most powerful state. Where? France. The French Revolution. Causes included an economic crisis. The French government had ironically just spent a lot of money funding whose revolution? The American, and was greatly in debt, which caused the king to try to raise taxes. It was inspired by America. You'll remember that France had still at that time a lot of social inequality left over from the feudal system of the Middle Ages, where the aristocracy and the clergy had special privileges, and the 98% of the population who were neither of those things had not those privileges and less rights and high taxes. And of course, Enlightenment ideals played their role in all of these revolutions. But that, there was in the feudalism in France, right? There was legal equality for all French men. Napoleon came along, the military dictator who took power kind of in the chaos after the revolution, and was able to use the feeling of patriotism in the French to go off and conquer much of Europe. And there was kind of this idea that although France kind of launched into this almost century-long cycle of like revolution, republic, king again, revolution, republic, king again, that there was a right on the part of people to have revolutions if their government broke the social contract. And finally, after the final French Revolution in the 1870s, France established a lasting permanent democracy at that point, which has lasted until this day. How radical was the French Revolution? Very. Pretty radical. Changed the social structure, changed the political structure, didn't change economics, but a lot of radical change that came out of the French Revolution. And kind of another offshoot of the French Revolution, because it happened in what was at the time one of France's colonies, was which one? The Haitian Revolution. Haiti was then known as Saint-Domingue, a French sugar colony. Again, inspiration from the Enlightenment and the French and American Revolutions. Slavery, of course. You could call the Haitian Revolution a revolution, but it would also be accurate to call it one of the many slave rebellions that occurred throughout the Americas in the 300 plus years of Atlantic slavery. This is different though, because this is the one slave rebellion that actually worked, where the rebelling enslaved people were able to defeat their owners and gain their freedom. And when they did, they had a new nation state for themselves called Haiti. They're the second independent nation in the Americas following colonization. Total change to the social structure. Slavery totally eliminated. The racial hierarchy of Haiti totally eliminated. And Haiti became independent. Total change to the economy. The plantation economy, which was based on slave labor and coerced labor, ended entirely at that time. And most people there went back to subsistence agriculture, just growing food for themselves. Now, at this point, too, a lot of the soil of Haiti had already been exhausted, so that was another reason that the plantation economy there collapsed. But concurrent with the revolution, Haiti becomes one of the poorest states in the world, unfortunately, in the subsequent 200 years. And it did inspire more rebellion by enslaved people. It worked in Saint-Domingue. Maybe it will work here in South Carolina / Brazil / Jamaica. So it kind of fueled a rise in slave rebellions elsewhere in the Americas as well. And then the final round of revolutions or wars of independence happened. We just described them using the name of an entire region of the world. Where? Latin America. So the Latin American revolutions, again, the same stuff. Enlightenment ideals, like constitutional government, and the examples of earlier revolutions that worked. 3 of them now in the U.S. and France and Haiti. And remember, resentment of Spanish rule was pretty high. Remember the Jamaica letter? Hey, who wrote that Jamaica letter? Simón Bolívar, one of only 3 people I can think of off the top of my head that has an entire country named after him. Wrote that letter complaining about Spanish rule. And remember, this was a case where the elites in the colonies, the Creoles and the Peninsulares, the white people, essentially, feared losing their status in a more radical revolution. They saw what had happened in Haiti, where the elite whites had lost their power. And they didn't want that happening in Latin America. So maybe the solution was to seize power quickly for themselves. To prevent a more radical revolution from happening later on. And it worked. Most Latin American colonies, not all of them, but most, became independent states. But unlike or contrary to the hopes of Simón Bolívar, who hoped to create kind of a United States of Latin America, stretching from Mexico all the way to Argentina, that didn't happen. It was just kind of too diverse of an area, and there was no united states of Latin America that was ever created. A lot of things did not change. social structure largely remained the same. Although most Latin American states did abolish slavery with their revolutions, Mexico did, for example, right away. The sort of racial hierarchy of the castas with white people or creoles at the top and mestizos in the middle. Ooh, mestizos have ancestry that's what and what? Yep, Amerindian and European in the middle, and blacks and Native Americans or Amerindians on the bottom. That was still the same. The economy based on producing cash crops and mining, that was largely still the same. That didn't change. But slavery is abolished after independence everywhere except for Brazil in Latin America. So that's a change. And radicalness of the Latin American revolutions, what would you say? Not super radical. Kind of like a conservative set of revolutions. Kind of like in North America. And these revolutions, you might remember, Stranger's name for chapter 17 was the Atlantic revolutions and their echoes, longer-term effects besides the revolutions themselves. What were some of those things? Feminism? The abolitionism, right, this desire to get rid of slavery. And nationalism. So let's look at these. Let's look maybe here, first of all, at feminism. There's Olympe de Gouges. What did she write? She got executed. The Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Citizen. And you might know there's several forms. Those documents you read on February 25th or so had several forms of feminism. Maternal feminism. Some of you read that document by Mary Wollstonecraft saying women should get educated and they should have rights. Because it will make them better wives and mothers, right? So saying, yes, women deserve better, so they can be better wives and mothers, maternal feminism. And then more radical feminists, right? You know, like Olympe de Gouges, who would say, screw that. Women should be treated better because they're humans. Forget about being wives and mothers. They should be equal citizens with men and get education and rights just the same as men. That's what the Enlightenment says. Equality for all. And as Andrew noted, for her trouble, she was executed. So maybe a little bit radical for the time, but a very Enlightenment kind of idea of why you should, why women should have equal rights to men. And I think that that it's worth noting, though, that everyone here we've looked at so far is European. That Enlightenment ideals of feminism also spread to North America too, where there's an active movement for women's suffrage. What does suffrage mean? Voting rights for women. So that's important too. Let's look at abolitionism too. There's that medal commemorating the end of slavery when the British Empire abolished slavery entirely in 1834. A big victory for the abolitionist movement. Obviously, this relates to Enlightenment ideals. Freedom and equality don't comport well with slavery. Movements within Protestant Christianity, there are a lot more people, especially in the Protestant world, saying, look, this is not Christian to enslave people. And the Haitian Revolution, which quite honestly scared the bejesus out of a lot of slave owners who were like, this isn't going to end well. We got to end slavery some way that doesn't involve me being like impaled on a spike and burnt to death. And so they did. Atlantic, kind of the first big victory for abolitionists was when the Atlantic slave trade itself, trafficking in humans across the Atlantic, was outlawed by the British and American governments in the year 1808. And the British Navy, the most powerful navy in the world, was pretty effective at putting an end to the Atlantic slave trade at that point. And in the 1830s, slavery is outlawed entirely in the British Empire. At the same time, by the way, it's being outlawed in Mexico and Argentina and all those newly independent states in Latin America. It takes America longer. It's not for about a century after America's revolution, not till the Civil War in the 1860s, that slavery is outlawed in Americas. And the last place that had slavery in any large area in the Atlantic world was Brazil. In 1888, finally abolished slavery. And keep in mind, though, that in some parts of the world, West Africa and the Muslim world, slavery continues, and in some places still, though kind of on the DL, it continues to this day. So it's not a total victory for the abolitionist movement. Our third long-term effect, you guys correctly identified just a few minutes ago, was nationalism. Look at those Germans being all nationalistic in 1848. How can you tell they're being all nationalistic there? Yeah, look at that nationalist flag, a symbol of nationalism. And it's good to keep in mind kind of where this idea comes from, nationalism. I mean, for one thing, the French Revolution is a big promoter of this idea across Europe, the idea that if you're people with a common culture and history, that's what makes you a nation. If you speak the same language, like French, if you eat the same stuff, like baguettes and horses and snails, if you listen to the same music, like accordions, why golly, you're a nation. And you deserve your own nation state to be all nationalistic in. And there was more standardization of culture. Like at this time period, more and more people are speaking the common languages. They're abandoning local dialects. In France, before the Revolution, there was like 8 different languages spoken in France. There was French, but there was also Breton and Provençal and Languedoc and all these other languages people spoke. And the government made a big effort to get everybody speaking French, right? So they could be a cohesive nation. So that's a change. Let's look at some of the effects of nationalism here. First of all, there are more nation states formed. As people who realize they share a common culture, hey, we all eat pasta, we're all Catholic, we all speak Italian-ish, we should all be one nation state. So people like Garibaldi here start nationalist movements, and they unite people into new nation states like Italy and Germany in Europe. One state for most of the people who speak Italian and German. That's one effect. And then there's people who have nationalistic struggles for independence from their rulers. The Greeks, remember, who rules the Greeks at the beginning of this era? The Ottomans. The Ottomans do. But the Greeks are like, hold the phone, Ottomans. We're not Turkish like you are. We're Greek. We speak Greek. We're not Muslim like you are. We're Orthodox Christian. We deserve our own nation state, so we're going to rebel. And they did. Or the Irish. They were like, we're not British. We're mostly Catholic. You're mostly Protestant. You guys play cricket. We play Gaelic football. We want our own nation state. Let's rebel. And they did too. So rebellions. And of course this idea catches on in other places too. China has a nationalist movement. The Boxer Rebellion is kind of a nationalist movement in China saying, the Qing dynasty doesn't represent us as a nation.